on this computer.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so thank you so much, Daniel, for your willingness to speak with us today. My name is Marthe Muller. I'm sitting in Cape Town, South Africa, and I met Daniel in 2015 when he visited South Africa for the first time. That was the first time, right? And only time so far.
Yes, unfortunately.
Well, thanks, Daniel. Good morning. I wanted to ask you to tell us about yourself, your name and your age, and how you identify yourself in terms of your cultural background, ancestry, and the culture you were born into and grew up in. If you could, thank you.
Okay. Well, my birth name is Norman Albert Tipner. I was born 5 p.m. on November 15th, 1943, and that makes me 79 and a half years old. I had a severe closed head injury from an accident in 1990, August 30th, 1990. And the result was that not eventually, but I began to have a personality change, and I eventually changed my name completely to Daniel Raphael legally. So next year I will have been Daniel Raphael for 30 years.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that. And the ancestry that you had, Tipner, where did your family come from?
My great-grandparents emigrated from Germany, it'd be Eastern Europe, in 1879, and traveled. So my great-grandfather is German. My great-grandmother is German. Okay, that's my paternal side. I never met my paternal grandparents. My maternal grandparents came from Norway in shortly after that, I think. And so my heritage is I'm half German and 3/8 Norwegian and 1/8 Swedish.
Wow. And where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Silverton, Oregon, and I grew up to age 11 in Oregon in the foothills of the Cascades. My dad was originally a logger and then became a farmer, and he raised grains for the horses, our plow horses, working horses, and also for raised strawberries, which were turned into jam and exported to California. So I understand farm work, and we left there. I think a part of that answer needs to include the fact that I was on the very last day of being accepted into the first grade at age 5, and so I've always been academically slow and socially immature. My parents thought that their children should be left to the teachers to teach and train and so on. And anyhow, that's why I'm so resentful about the American academic education system.
But so you had siblings as well?
So I've always worked with that, okay? Being a small rut in school didn't help me. Being bullied didn't help me, and so on. So, having gone back to those years to reflect on that while I was recovering in 1990 through 1994, I had a time to look at all these things and see how was this person formed. and what did their parents do and what didn't they do? And most children blame their parents for a lot of things, but for me, I had to understand why they did that. And so that's another story, but I won't share that right now. So my struggle has been to achieve, not that I was an overachiever, never was. And we moved to Longmont, Colorado, where we lived 2 years. And my dad had a gasoline business, distribution business. Then we moved to a farm near Callender, Iowa, which is southwest of Fort Dodge, Iowa. And so I spent my high school years on a farm in Iowa. Small school. Graduated when I was 17, entered college at Iowa State University as a civil engineering major. I had no business being a civil engineering major. I couldn't even do advanced fundamental algebra. They started us on trigonometry and radians. So dropped out. Went back to Longmont, worked for my uncle in his bakery, and my parents moved to Arizona in early 62. And so I started Arizona State University in the fall of 1962. And I did my own career counseling, and I looked at my ACT scores, other scores. I was, at the 35th, 37th percentile in physical sciences and mathematics and so on. But I was at the 97th percentile in natural sciences and 96th percentile in social sciences. Well, golly gee, you don't have to be a genius to figure out that maybe sociology would be a good major. So that's what I majored in, and I graduated in the top 10% academically of my class of 4,300 people.
Well, may I take you back a little bit from there?
Of course.
To ask you, so and thanks for giving that whole background to your history and your living on farms. I wanted to know when you first became aware of your extrasensory perception as a child and how that affected you. Was it something that you struggled to accept?
I became aware of extrasensory perception in the form of prescience at age 8, because I was seeing the future, and I'm talking about the large arc of history, seeing the large dimensions of nations and politics and economies. And for an 8-year-old to understand that, it's like, that's not going to happen. I saw those things, recognized them, and kept my mouth shut, and didn't share my prescience with anyone until much, much, much later. And but I knew that in time, I knew that over time, that, let me phrase this better, I became more experienced with my prescience within myself and for my own life. I've never really been able to pin my finger on what is exactly going to happen in my life immediately, like tomorrow. But I could tell you that I knew when I went over to Vietnam that I was going to be safe, and that the big Army computer, which angels can manipulate really well, would assign me to a safe assignment and see to it that I remained safe. The prescience continued as my own spirituality grew, and I must say that it was a defining moment for me after I dropped out of Iowa State University. I then, in the next fall, of 67, after I completed college. Oh, wait. Yes, and my grandmother was a devout Lutheran, and she wanted me to become a minister. Well, at least one of her grandsons to be a minister.
Yes.
So I went to Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary in Berkeley, California, at the end of Marin Drive, clear at the top, and was soon immersed in Greek and Latin and church history and homiletics and you name it. And but I, even at that time, when I went to the seminary, I was like 23, 22, something like that.
Yeah.
67. Yep. So anyhow, I was looking for a personal relationship with God. I had established a praying relationship with God long before then, and knew that God was involved in my life, but I didn't understand what that meant. And so as I went through the second quarter of seminary, I dropped out. I was looking for an intimate personal relationship with God, not a distant academic, cold-hearted, wasn't even theological, a relationship with God. So when I think about ministers, they're really owned by the church.
Yeah.
So continue on with the prescience, please.
May I then just ask you, when you, because I guess my question was the link between the prescience and this religious awareness that you had in your own life. So there was some awareness of the presence of God. You followed your grandmother's desire to study theology, but there was a greater desire within you. And I think I want to link now the prescience to what happened to you when you had the closed brain trauma. If you're comfortable telling that whole experience of, firstly, what was happening in your 20s then, when you were no longer at the seminary, before you had the closed brain trauma, and then what happened afterwards in terms of your prescience and your clairaudient ability?
Well, it's quite a gap there. I came back from Vietnam in 1969, and it wasn't until 21 years later, that I had the closed head injury.
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking about?
Yes. Okay, so that I didn't understand the link, the 20 years between them. So there was a 20 years. And what happened in those 20 years? You came back. How did Vietnam change your experience? One thing of life.
It made me serious, that's for sure. You know, you can't walk through a hospital and see men totally bandaged and go back the next day and they're not there because they're in the morgue. So it had a sobering experience to me. I was never under immediate threat of being killed. I was fortunate to have been assigned to my first post at Longmont post, which is 40,000 soldiers. And through a wonderful angelic fluke of circumstances, I remained on that post. So during that 20 years, it was marriage, children, mortgage, career.
Yes.
Okay.
And your career?
And the career, I started off as a correctional counselor trainee at the Oregon State Penitentiary. And then through my experiences in corrections, I became a manager of a workplace center and parole and probation officer, pre-sentence investigation report writer. So I have a lot of experience with deviant personalities and individuals of that sort. During that 20 years, my spirituality was just idling. It was in neutral, so to speak. It wasn't fully engaged. Being a breadwinner, working in corrections, which is not easy, taking care of mortgages, and also I got my master's degree in education. Specialty was in education and culturally disadvantaged.
Yeah.
Which helped my corrections career. And then eventually in 1988, I left corrections due to a severe suicidal depression, and moved on. And then voila, the lights went out in 1990, and I was a new person.
May I then ask you, when you had you first read the Urantia book? When had you first come across the Urantia book? Prior to 1988?
Oh yes, 1972.
Long time prior.
I read it six times. I read it 6 times, front to back, and it was presented to me by an inmate at the penitentiary as a really grandiose science fiction book. Well, I had read science fiction for many, many years. So it piqued my interest. I ordered it unseen, 2,200 pages for the outrageous price of $27 in 1972. And ordered it, received it, and proceeded to read it. There was a child involved in the middle of that, moving, selling a house, buying a house, etc. So it took me 18 months to get through it the first time. And I knew at that time, I just knew at that time that this wasn't all the story. That was not the whole story. That I knew, I'll put that in quotes, knew that there's far more to it. And that even though it was a huge book, I saw it in my mind's eye, my psychic mind, as one on a shelf that is about 20 feet long of the whole universe. So it's just a piece of the puzzle, but it's enough for mortals on this planet to become acquainted with the grand design of the universe that God created.
Then
go ahead.
May I then ask you the link between the reading of the Urantia book, you're becoming aware of the Urantia teaching mission, and you're becoming a clairaudient channel of celestial teachers? How did that happen? And how did the closed brain trauma, what role did the closed brain trauma play in that?
At the time of the accident, I fell headfirst onto a concrete floor, and I was unconscious for about 4 hours, and I woke up in the hospital. But in the early part of that, my recovery, laying on the floor, I had an out-of-body experience, viewing my body. I was probably about 15 feet away, viewing my body laying on the floor. And it's pretty much, I thought about it in the same way as a person who comes to a party and takes off their coat and hangs it up and proceeds to the party and never thinks about that coat again. And that's how I appreciated my body laying on the ground, on the floor in the garage. So it wasn't startling. It's just like, well, that's my body, so what? But the really interesting thing was that I was standing next to my guardian.
Sorry, we can continue.
Okay.
There was a glitch there. It might happen again, but please, you were standing next to your guardian angel.
Yes, and this was a momentous occasion for my life, because she asked me if I wanted to continue on, meaning did I want to remain here and finish out my life, or did I want to cross over? Well, at that time, it's an interesting interview because there's pieces that are missing. For instance, at age 27, I became aware that over a period of several months, I became aware that I had a destiny, that there was something for me to do during my lifetime. And I didn't know what, wasn't ever disclosed. So when in that, so I was 27, that would make it 1970. Yep, about. So in the following years, I began to think that I began to discover what I thought it would be. Now, this is where people mislead themselves with doing God's will, because they think they're being guided to do this or do that, where in fact, if they just let go and let God would open opportunities for them to proceed with their life according to their life plan. So anyhow, I was sidelined in my life by some things I thought I had to do. And so Leah, my guardian angel, asked me at the time that I had this out-of-body experience, whether I wanted to continue on with my life plan or did I want to cross over. And I chose to continue on. I had been teased or seduced or persuaded by this destiny in my life. And I'm just a terribly curious person, and I have just a million questions, which has caused a big problem for me as a clairaudient channel, is that I'm the channel, but I don't ask any questions.
Yes.
Which is unethical for a channel to do, because it steers the session. So I continued on. I recovered, and circumstances of my life have allowed me to move forward. In the meantime, without any health insurance, I paid as many hospital bills as I could, continued to live off my credit cards, and eventually had to cut them up and file for bankruptcy. And when you are dead broke, $8 you name in any form, and your best companion is God, plus my lady friend, who said, she said, Norman, you always end up landing on your feet no matter where you go. Well, that's true. I have made good out of a bad situation. So when that was disclosed, she asked me that, then I continued on. And there's a phrase that fundamental Christians use, is that we live the revelation, and we are the revelation. And so they may think the revelation is the word of God by the Bible and New Testament, but really we in our life, we are the revelation. We live the revelation of who we become, how we add to our soul's weight so that we cross over and stay crossed over. So that question has been working out in my life, and to pursue that has been quite an experience. Now back to the Urantia book and becoming a clairaudient channel. That's a story. Yeah. In 1992, oh no, earlier than that. It's before I was divorced from my second wife. She and I were part of a Urantia reading group. And so when she and I split, she continued the reading group, and I dropped out because her boyfriend was there, and that upset me. And so finally, I met some old friends from that group, and finally, for the third time, someone said, "Well, Norman, you really got to come to the Rancher group again. It's not like it used to be. And so I went there and I went in the house and looked around, and nobody had their books out. There weren't even any books underneath their chairs. But there was Mona sitting in the corner of the room in this nice chair and with her eyes closed. And so pretty soon they started, and she opened up by saying, "This is Abigail. I'm here with this correcting time. I'm here with the teaching mission," and basically gave the group the standard syllabus of a 2-year lesson plan for the teaching mission. Well, that raised my eyebrows. So I went back a second time and the third time. And finally, third time, this was the spring of 1993. I was driving home and I said, "Well, Christ, Michael, if you think I ought to become a TR, a transmitter receiver, a clairaudient channel, then I would volunteer to that if you want me to do that." And so it was a year. So that I began working on that on the keyboard. I would close my eyes and use the keyboard. And I, of course, had put some nice glass beads glued to my keyboard in specific places to keep my place. And I learned to channel that way. And then a year later, in the spring of 1994, I was here and relocated to Colorado. And I began associated with other people who had participated in the teaching mission. Most of them had been Urantia book readers. And pretty soon, several of us split off and wanted to practice on our own. And that's what we did. And I began to become, I practiced being a clairaudient TR channel that fall in 94. But it was not until 1999 that I became truly fluent, as you've heard me channel for the last 10 years or so. In that time, let me see, there was a teaching mission conference in Snowbird, Utah in, 2001, August. And so happenstance would have it that some people from Loveland, Colorado, which is north of here, thought they were having car trouble and asked if I would follow them back home to Colorado. And so we stopped in Laramie, Wyoming, and had lunch for 3 hours. Talking about channeling and all this stuff. And so we made an agreement that was with Roxanne and Jim Andrews. And we started that fall. And since then, I have channeled over 500 transcripts, almost or exceeding 3 million words. Plus the ones I did for individuals. So there is quite a history of that. And during that process, I've experienced the presence of numerous celestial teachers. Racing is one of them. A celestial teacher is a mortal who has graduated, crossed over to the Morontial realm, and who has had enough education on the Morontial schools to volunteer to be present during this correcting time program. So that kind of brings us up to the present time, where celestials have, in the last 20 years, have been doing their thing, so to speak, with celestials, with mortals, clairaudient channels, and through some of the programs that they've developed. because of the world situation now, they have made their presence known, and they want their presence known to the rest of the world. Because as humans have so thoroughly demonstrated, are incapable as a civilization to help themselves, to progress, and that we are so club-footed that we don't know how to move forward on our own, and need some opportunities to grow. So my role as a clairaudient channel has changed, in that it is my role now to assist the celestials to become known to the world. And that's all I can say about that.
Well, I mean, thank you so much for taking it that far, because I wanted now to talk. I want to ask you one question before I talk about the almost 50 books. I think they're more than 50 books that you've produced in the last 9 years, and I'll go to the content of those books. But first, I wanted to say, or ask you, what your own spiritual practices are at this stage of your life, how they've changed during your life, and how you have been changed by the teachings of the celestials.
A lot of questions, Martha. Well, I have to go back to age 16, 17, in high school, when I saw the future rushing to me, where I would graduate from high school and my parents would almost virtually kick me out of the house. You know, being German, you know, when you are of age and out of school, it's time to leave home. And knowing how socially immature I was, had no courage at all to move forward on my own, but nevertheless had to. So my prayer to God, and for the next 50 years, was to do God's will and to help people help themselves. I didn't know how that would enact, how that would work out, but that has been a constant in my life. Prayer has been a constant. I believed, I somehow preconsciously knew that I had a guardian angel and that she was present with me. That's part of the Christian teachings. And that she was there to help me complete this journey. So, having gone to the seminary, I realized that academic religion was dead, at least for me, and that it was not the way forward to know God more personally or intimately. In Vietnam, I continued to pray. And then when I came home, you know, jumping into a career, marriage, debt, all kids, family. Yeah, you pray. I prayed for right action. So, but living through life, we go through divorces, we go through bankruptcies, we go through quitting work or being demoted or who knows what. And so we are met with challenges. And how do we get through that? How does a believer get through that? Well, it was with, it is through hope, belief, faith, trust, and knowing. Well, the first four are all mental belief systems. The fifth one, knowing, is based on experience. And I trusted at that point that God would take care of me. It wasn't until, I'm racing back and forth through these decades.
That's perfect, yeah.
I'm trying to remember it in right order. That through the circumstances, I know what it was. That, yeah, I had a moment. During the time I was recovering from 1991 to 93 first 2 years I lived with my mother. And from 91 to 93, I lived in the basement of a metaphysical bookstore on Fairgrounds Road in Salem, Oregon. Well, I had access to all the tapes, all the lessons, all the books. And the clerk who worked at the bookstore for my sister-in-law now was a minister of the American Spiritualist Church. Well, he'd been channeling dead people for a long time. I don't channel dead people. I channel the spiritual management of the universe. Okay, Christ Michael, Gabriel, the Most Highs, Academically, Melchizedek, planetary manager, my guardian angel, my thought adjuster. Actually, I don't publicly channel my thought adjuster. That's been always very private and personal to me. Well, though it's not impossible to do. So I began to accept the idea that we could talk to people who are not here, that the other realms are present in our lives, except that we don't see them. Dogs and cats see them, and some of the higher animals see them, but most people don't. And that there are energies which surround us that are as well present and can affect us. And I began to have much more mental control of my mind and the moods I chose. And only within the last 7-8 years have I been able to have my work with my thought adjuster to control my negative thoughts. And I've asked about this because the conscious mind, if you were raised as an abused child or a neglected child, your conscious mind always reflects on that and always wants you to resolve that. So, and for myself, I had being bullied a great deal and being small in my life. I have native paranoia that exists in me, and that I'm always on guard. So there are negative thoughts that pervaded my mind, and that's very detrimental to your mental health and to your spiritual health and your growth and emotional balance and your presence with others. So I had been working with my thought adjuster, and I thought, well, if you're a thought adjuster, here, give me some help. So I don't want to have these negative thoughts anymore. So here's what I did. I said, well, you're the presence of God inside of me, as in everybody else. I want you to control my thinking, so I don't have any more of this negative, hostile, violent thoughts in my mind. Most men could relate to that. In fact, that most men think about sex. If they haven't reached age 70 yet, they still think about sex. And you name it, they think about it. And it's a constant presence in a man's life. Well, for myself, being past my libido, all I was left with was this friggin' conscious mind having this violent ideation. And for a writer, that's not conducive to good writing. At least, I write nonfiction, philosophical, political, academic, etc. So with a clear mind, a person can become really, really productive. After age 65, my libido pretty much faded out of sight. Well, I have a friend who just loves sex, and he's the same age as I am, and he takes Viagra, and he can still conduct a good sexual encounter, I guess. Well, not for me, because I knew that this sexual thinking of mine was incredibly distractive. It was a distraction of major proportions. So at age 65, I began to write a lot, consistently, copiously. I assigned myself a 6-month goal of writing a one-page paper every day for 6 months on any topic, but it had to make sense. And I did that. And I published them on academically. You'd have to go way back in the records and find that. As that was a discipline to write and to think rationally about any kind of topic. As I said, I'm very curious. And so I always want to know the interaction between myself and my spiritual helpers. I've had several literary helpers throughout my writing career. First one was, I called her AAA, angelic administrative assistant. And there is, in fact, they are mentioned in the Rancher book. So I'd call her AAA. Well, she helped me with my literary writing. And of course, the whole goal in the presence of angels and Melchizedeks and thought adjusters is to guide the thinking of the individual to become a mature soul. Well, we have to become socially mature, psychologically mature, in order to really add copiously to our soul growth and weight. And I knew that. So that's been a constant part of my life. The presence, the first time, when I lived in the bookstore for 2 years, I would talk out loud because I was in the basement. There weren't any classes on some days, and the store was empty most of the time. So I would talk out loud to my guardian angel, and so I'd ask her questions, and I would open my mind and talk, and I imagined that she was listening and that she was holding her side of a dialogue that I couldn't hear. But one day, out of the blue, when my mind was on idle, she asked me a question. Well, that made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. Because I'd always been speaking, but had never heard her say anything to me in response. A good conversation is a delicious dialogue. It's a delicious experience to get to know a friend. And so I thought, you want to ask some really pragmatic questions that time. I said, who's here? And at that time, I knew that her name was Leah. That had come to me over several months. That was a task. And I said, okay, Leah, maybe it was later. I don't know. Anyhow, I said, who are you? I'm your guardian angel. Who do you work for? I work for Nevedonia, of course, with several levels in between. Excuse me. I said, okay, wow. And so this began the process of having an open, ongoing dialogue with spiritual entities. Now, it's essential that the mortal individual be able to ascertain the character of who's speaking to them. Who do you work for? That's a test, okay? Do you work for Christ Michael? Sometimes you just don't hear anything. You're like, oh, you don't work for Christ Michael. So, okay, goodbye. I don't want to see you around here anymore. I ban you from my presence. And so every time someone shows up, I would ask them. And it requires a good deal of trust on the part of the mortal individual to really trust this process, because the human mind, conscious mind, wants to deceive ourselves in one way or another. There's a bumper sticker that says, don't believe everything you think. Hey, I mean, that's classic. and so true. So what I'm getting at, Martha, is that I can, you have a phone directory and you want to call somebody and you don't remember the numbers. So you go to your contact list and you go in there and see their name and you hit the little telephone and it dials their number. And so that's the way it is with me here. If I want to talk to Macaventa Melchizedek, I say, Macaventa, are you here? And he would say, I'm here. This is Macaventa. And then I would ask him a question or say something and ask him to confirm that or not. So I found that beings of light are very passive. They are not very directive. They are directive in that they will give you opportunities to take advantage of in your life, and that changes the course of your life. That's their work. But as far as offering directions during the daytime, they never say, "Oh, you ought not to do that." No. They never do that. Okay. They're always wanting the individual to come to them. Okay. This is eventually an internal process of where you are always going to spirit. And when you work with the beings of light, they have always good intentions for you, and they always want you to proceed and progress in your mortal life plan so you become more and more mature. And so over the time, I have had several literary assistants, and now I've been working for the last 8 years, I guess, with Avila Melchizedek, who has been the co-author, my silent co-author of all the books I've written, all the papers I've written, all the articles I've written. And that we have a particular and perhaps I wouldn't say peculiar way of writing, but it is often without an outline. And I know what the subject is, and I ask him, well, am I on track? And he'll say yes. And then when I complete a chapter, I said, this doesn't feel quite right. Would you reveal to me what's missing here? And sure enough, within the next day, or could be next minute, or could hour, or a day, the answer through one circumstance or another becomes known to me, and I go, oh yeah, I need to put that in there. And that's how we proceeded. Right now I'm writing, in the last year, I've written several books or papers on artificial intelligence. Well, lo and behold, Martha, my first AI ethics book was written 5 years ago. Okay, 2018. And before it was really a topic. And see, that's where the prescience comes in. And I don't write articles as to fulfill a need, but in the present time, but in the future time. Like I've written a paper on the recovering from the cataclysm that happened. Okay. So that's part of the story, is that we must Western thinkers are not good planners. They're not good strategic planners at all. You don't have to be much of a historian, and one of the persons I do admire is Jared Diamond.
Absolutely,
Collapse. The guy's a genius. I mean, he sees the great arc similarly as I see the great arc of human history and what is happening. And he hits it's like a big cash register. He finally punches in all the keys and hits the total button, and he comes up and basically the answer is we're in deep doo-doo. And what is coming and is happening now, we're not even in the middle of it yet, is that we can't prevent it. Whether it is CO2 levels, whether it's economic, whether it is overpopulation, there's no halting it. Even if we stopped having babies, that would have a major effect in 20 years. But that's not going to happen. So knowing that things will continue as they are and they'll only get worse, we can surmise that there will be some kind of a depopulation or decimation of our species. And that, well, guess what? How are we going to put it all back together again? You know, the philosophical question is, do we want to restore what we had, or do we want to create something new that is self-sustaining? And that's my questions, and that's the questions I've striven to answer with Avila in these books and papers. Now, what must we do to prepare for the recovery? And the first primary effort is, well, it is not going to be the rocks or the mountains, is it? Or the trees or the oceans. It's going to be people. And where do people come from? I have this penchant. I just have this passion for simplifying things down to their grounded essence. And when it comes to reality, there's only two facets of reality. That's people and things that are not people. And so the things that change history and change the future are people. So if we want to restore, if we want to create a sustainable future, then we must begin with the family, where people come from. Well, the way I was raised, my parents had no business having children. Neither one had the skills to, they did not learn the skills around them to become parents, good parents, well, let alone parents, let alone being good parents. They weren't bad parents, but it was a matter of neglect, not abuse. So if you want to be a good mother, you need to have a good mother. And if you haven't had a good mother, then you need to learn to be a good mother. Well, there aren't many schools that teach that. And so I have, with Avila and Macaventa, have designed the family living.
Learning centers.
Yeah, thank you, dear. Family learning centers for sustainable families and for sustainable nations.
Yeah.
And so there, you know, and I know some people personally who are tremendous people. They have somehow learned the skills of being a good person, and either by their parents or by some modeling or on their own or through their parents or grandparents. And some of them learn to be good fathers and mothers the same way. Well, I want to interview a couple hundred of those and ask them, how did you become the person you are now? Maybe this is what you're doing today. I don't know. That's, you know, being terribly curious. The answer for me is that I didn't raise myself, but I was so curious to know what worked.
Yes.
And a fellow who really helped me was Kurt Wright, who's now deceased, who wrote the book Breaking the Rules: How to Achieve High Performance in Your Organizations. Anyhow, so I wanted to know what worked, and I wanted to apply that to myself. Having been raised by a German father and a very passive mother, I used that technique, that model, with my oldest son. And here he is now 52. Yeah, 52. And he had an aha this last year where he outgrew his dad. Okay. He discovered himself. Okay, that's what we must do. Second son was raised much differently. I was a member of a Unity, a spiritual metaphysical church organization, which I still maintain some contact. And his life has been much different. So discovering these people and finding out how they were raised, what was their major influence to form them to whom they became? That's it. You know, I'm going to be 80 this fall. I figure I got about 12, 15 more years the most, as long as my head stays together. And to be of use to make some of these things come true, to write about them, to actually fund several clinics. I call them clinics. So that's a lot of work.
Well, I thank you so much for, I mean, you've answered so many of the questions I had anyway, because I wanted to go back to all the teachings that have come out of these 50 works, collaboration. And I mean, one of the major ones is the one about the 7 values that have sustained our species for 8,000 generations.
Yes.
If you could explain how those 7 values allow us to create socially sustainable families and societies.
I'd be glad to. I have a dear friend who you know as well, Liz, and she's an author of fiction books, and she's a good writer and uses excellent English in her spoken English and her written English. So I had learned from my therapist while I was recovering from depression, 3 years of therapy, that values always underlie decisions. All right. Well, so Liz, she said, she corrected me and says, Daniel, values underlie decisions, but I want to put in always.
Yes.
Because it's the point. People don't think about their values. Well, so decisions, values. So I love history, and I knew that our species Homo sapiens had been in existence approximately 200,000 years and more, in one form or another. And that we are Homo sapiens. Well, connect those 2 dots. Intuitively, I knew that somehow our ancient ancestors made the right decisions so that our species survived. Well, the intuitive question then is, what values did they use, probably unconsciously, that guided them to make decisions that supported the survival of the species? Generally, that's what happened. Okay, some individuals decided to eat a saber-toothed tiger for lunch, and the tiger had them for lunch, and so they didn't make the survival list. So and it just happened. So let's set that piece right there. So it just happened that in 2007, Cheryl and I sponsored a workshop in excuse me for stuttering here, stumbling, in Snowbird, Utah, same place where the conference was held in 2001. And so I explained the values and decision-making, and particularly design teams. And I taught that these people, we had about 12 people there, how the design team worked. And that I had created a very, very rudimentary procedural format on a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And that if you followed this procedure in a team setting, and that there were specific roles in the team of facilitator, recorder, a consultant. That's kind of the consultant was the person who kept the team on track over the long course of things. And then inquiring members. And the inquiring members, their sole role was to ask cogent and careful questions to unlock the gist of the topic that was being discussed. And so I used that. So the workshop was done. Several of my neighbors were there. And the workshop was held in October, and finally in November, several of them came by and said, well, Daniel, well, you taught us these wonderful things. Now, you're just going to leave us with this? Now what? Which is a famous question of mine that I have used hundreds of times since then. Now what? I usually address that to the angels and celestials. So they said, well, come on, think of something. So I said, all right, let's start an experimental design team. So we met in December of 2007. And over the Christmas break, we met and started again in January. And we met every week for about 6 months. And I taught them about the design team process. And here's the motive for the team. I said, what topic do you want to work on? They asked, well, Daniel, what topic should we work on? I said, so I threw it back on them, being a good facilitator. I said, well, what topic would you like to work on? And so they talked about themselves, and by the time I came back from my friend's kitchen, they said, we want to know how to prevent disappointment in intimate relationships. I go, okay. Well, where do you go with that? So, but you follow the crumbs and you get to the goal. So we started, and we talked about it. And so I used the rough format of the schematic. I call it a schematic, this procedural format. And I said, what were your expectations when you got married, when you started this intimate relationship that ended up in marriage? And so we went around the room, several people there, and they said, well, yada, 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 yada. And so, and then being kind of the little devil's advocate, angel's advocate, I said, so how's that going for you? And so I could tell that several had been experiencing disappointment in their intimate relationship, whether it was an engagement or boyfriend, girlfriend, or marriage. And so they hummed and hawed and really didn't want to answer the question, but it raised the situation where we needed to delve more deeply into that. And so I asked them, what were your expectations for going into marriage, into a long-term intimate relationship? And some of them said, I didn't have a clue. I just knew I wanted to get married and I wanted to have kids and wanted a husband. And the women were always far more responsive than the men. The men, they're kind of like backup singers. They just hum. So we went through the schematic. One is they knew the results. There was disappointment. They had not anticipated it, so they did not expect that. I said, well, what were your beliefs when you went into marriage, intimate relationship? And so these a lot of the standard traditional beliefs of, oh, men and women need to be married, and they need to be together, need to have children, and like that. You need a companion through life. And and then I said, beliefs always come out of generated out of values. And I said, well, if you believe these things, what values were your beliefs expressing? And this is where it really got baffling. And we stumbled along with this situation for quite a while. And finally, See, my purpose as a facilitator was not to provide answers to them, but provide the facilitation for them to process the experience of being in a team with other people and to speak safely about anything that they wanted to. And so we eventually got around to the fact that they had certain assumptions, those hidden beliefs that are almost rarely ever examined by the individual, and almost rarely examined objectively when two people argue whether their Chevy is more important than the other person's Ford, and why. So there's a lot of assumptions going on. And but we didn't know how to identify them, Martha. And so I said, okay, let's work on values. What values would our ancient ancestors have had? Well, number one, life. Either going to be alive or not, or somebody else's lunch. So we established that life was it. And we had a hard time after that nailing down. And you know the reason why is between belief interpretations. Okay, we have certain beliefs, hundreds of them, that spin off of just a handful of values, and those also affect the quantity or the depth of our assumptions. So we had a hard time with that. So finally, you should be guessing by now that there was a Melchizedek involved in organizing this whole thing. And that organizing Melchizedek was Sandhya, Sondjah, who is the resident expert in teams and working groups. And so Sandhya knew what was happening, and I just reached out to him one day going home and said, Sandhya, you got to help us out here. We're not making any progress. We know life is important, and then what? And so at the next meeting, as we usually do after our sessions, team sessions, we would gather together in Michael's kitchen in his house and have snacks and maybe a glass of wine or something like that. And so me being on point, on post as a facilitator, I don't drink. So I said, and I always left early, which I usually like to do. And so as I was walking from the kitchen to the living room to get my coat, on the way, I had one of those astounding aha moments. Sometimes people get them when they're sleeping and then forget to write them down, but I have had them during my waking hours. Excuse me. So I was just like, oh my gosh, it was life, quality of life, growth, equality. So I knew the importance of that, so I immediately wrote them down. Thank God I did, because eventually they became the 4 primary values.
Yeah.
And they are the values that support the decision-making of the growth of societies, commerce, industry, finance, you name it, everything. They are basic to sustaining survival and a thriving existence. And if you go back 10,000 years, 20,000 years, not much was happening. There was, villages and so on. And but it becomes apparent when you think more deeply about these 4 values that these values have been used by people aggressively, hostilely, and egotistically as a means of subverting other people's lives and goals and economies and politics and so on. Well, it wasn't until 2014 that I received a call from my dear friend, Meinhard, who is from South Africa, who called me up. He was on the phone driving home from his morning trip to take his daughter to day school, to preschool. And he says, I've been thinking about your values, Daniel, and there are 3 other values that are important. And I said, what are those? He says, empathy, compassion, and love. Now, you have to, the test for those values, so now we're up to 7 values, is, are these learned? Did we learn those values when we were children? Did we learn them in school? Did we learn them academically in college, university, and etc.? No. Did anybody teach you how to have empathy? No. Compassion. How about love? No. Those are native. Those are native to us. They are innate to us. They're part of our genome, the human genome. And so on the basis of that, I have written an ethic. Values always underwrite any code of ethical decision-making and moral decision-making. And so I've had a number of professional ethicists, consultants I've talked with who say, well, you're making decisions on ethical principles. And I said, well, if I make a decision to be fair, which is an ethical principle, then what values underlie being fair? Well, none of them could answer that. And dozens of papers and huge tomes have been written on ethical theory of ethics. But they always talk about ethics. They don't talk of ethics. What is the theory of ethics? They don't know what I'm talking about. Okay. So with any set of values, values help us discern what's acceptable and what is not acceptable. Now, as a human, if someone's pointing a gun at you or has a knife against your throat, they're about to commit an immoral decision. Okay? Mm-hmm. So, that's not good. So the discerning value is life. Mm-hmm. If your life is sacred, my life is sacred. I value your life as much as you value my life. Mm-hmm. And so we treat each other as equals. Yeah. Okay. So if you come down to the hub of all values and decision-making, ethical and moral decision-making, it really comes down to equality. Mm-hmm. Okay. Even above life. Mm-hmm. People will sacrifice their life for you if they think that you are being treated unequally, and severely so. And we've seen that over and over again through the peace marches and the segregation happenings and things like that. People will die for equality. And so that means that their life is subordinate to equality. Mm. So equality is really a huge driving force in civilization and societies. So with these 7 values, I have created a unified theory of ethics. Okay, still a theory, because I can't prove them at the genetic level, though I'll want to talk about that in a few minutes. So also, so only within the last 6 months, 9 months, have I written a book, a paper that is entitled The Completion of Maslow's Theory of Human Motivation.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Maslow, bless his heart, gosh, he wrote this paper about the time I was born.
Yes.
So this has been around a long time. A lot of people know about it, and that's about all the only thing they could see when they talk about human motivation. He said that as our needs are satisfied, new needs arise.
Mm-hmm.
Correct? He never did tell us how that happens, did he? Okay. So how does it happen, a human motivation? And that paper explains it clearly, briefly, but clearly, is that somehow our mind, at some level, senses inequality, let's say, okay? And that, let us say that we are seeing a child being abused or neglected by an adult. And so we see that and we have empathy for this child. Well, what was it in us that we sensed that? Okay, that's not learned.
Mhm.
So if it's not learned, then it's part of the genetic instructions in our genome. And I can't cite the place or the location in the gene that carries that instructions, but something is triggered in our mind, and our mind or genome or something. And so that the instructions are released for operation. It's like a computer, okay? When you hit da 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 and then hit enter, that's what happens. It's that bingo, enter. And the instructions for empathy are there. And that creates a response in you. We call it from our heart, so to speak, from the depths of us. And you want to go help that kid. Well, that's called compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so if you're not taught empathy and compassion as a child, and you lived in the ghetto, and it's just, you're just one of 12 kids, you don't know how to activate that. So there's our training early in life helps us become wholly human. Okay. So we end up with a lot of people who are non-human. Well, that's another philosophical discussion. But so we have these traits, and these 3 values then, secondary values, empathy, compassion, and love, are what identify us as human and humane. Even some species of monkeys show empathy and compassion. Okay. That's been proven in laboratories over and over and over again. Okay. As far as love is concerned, that includes the empathy and compassion for all of humanity, as we have for ourselves and we have for others. And to have that kind of loving empathy and compassion for all humanity is the true test of being truly human, fully human. Okay? So anyhow, I've worked with those 7 values repeatedly in the design team process to design new, competent, capable, ethical, and moral corporate policies on hiring, equality. When you make an ethical statement says equal pay for equal work. Well, we understand that, don't we? But what's it called when you are doing the work and you're not paid equally as someone else who's doing the work? They're paid more. That's unethical. That card is not often very called aloud. Okay? We just kind of accept that and mumble over it and say, that's just not right. Equal work for equal pay for equal work. So, see, in that whole argument, of equal pay for equal work is missing the fact that it's immoral. You are affecting the life of that person, not only their life, but their children, their partner, those other people who are dependent upon you, even the grocer, even the gasoline attendant, okay? Because if you don't have the money, as someone else has the money doing the same amount of work, that affects your life, and that's immoral. In my span of work, ethics involves relationships, and morality affects the condition and existence of lives and living. Okay, so it's very distinct. That's very essential in this argument of the values, rather than this mumbo jumbo about ethics and writing 150 pages about the ethics of what it is. You know, I make it simple. If it's complicated, it's probably not going to work too well. Okay, where are you? Where are we?
Well, thank you so much for taking all the time to explain the 7 values, because I want to go back, and I just want to ask you about, there's another part which I think we must keep for another day, which is the whole stage 1, 2, and 3 democracy and the role of the feminine. But I think that needs a whole separate meeting. So I think to conclude today's session, if you could just tell us what has been the effect on your life of having access to these teachings by spiritual teachers that very clearly have shown you, from the time of Sonja Melchizedek, who showed us that our decisions to have families and to have intimate relationships are unsustainable when we don't have an intention for them. What have you learned from the celestial teachers that you can use to guide future and this current generation, myself included? You've made it clear that we are leading to a time of collapse, of civilizational collapse, that we can no longer stop it, that we have to be prepared for recovery after this collapse. But what have you learned from the spiritual teachers that would be a message that you can share with this generation and future generations?
Perhaps 2 essential things come to mind. One is to love yourself authentically and genuinely without self-aggrandizement or ego investment. We're just another person. Second is to develop true self-confidence. If you don't have self-confidence and you don't have a genuine love of yourself, then you will not have confidence in others, and you will have no love for others either. This is the beginning of civilization. If we are to make a difference in the future, we must begin with ourselves. A self-examination is one of the, it's anathema to American society and culture. It's self-examination, or to stop and listen and reflect. I could go on with self-confidence. For instance, I have become more and more Eastern throughout my life, as aggressively passive, letting things happen as they might or should or could, and not trying to intervene. And I'm not trying to change the world. I'm trying to change one individual at a time. And it begins in the family. And if people who have a natural endowment of being raised by civilized parents who are capable, caring, loving parents, they have an asset that will carry them all through their life. They have an asset that they can share with their children, their grandchildren, their neighbors' children, and as a grandparent and uncle or neighbor or whatever, aunts too. So that's a lot of work, Martha, for people to do. You don't go down to Home Depot and buy a kit for self-confidence.
So let me ask, sorry, I want to pin us both to finalize. The last question I want to ask you today, and Daniel, thanks for your time. This has been a marathon session, is if you were to given more time, more resources, more energy, what would you still like to accomplish in the life that you have left?
Yes, I have two things. One is I've asked for, 15 years ago when I first, 20 years ago when I first learned about AI, artificial intelligence. One is to help support the creation of a compassionate AI program, one that is ethical, one is moral, and AI needs some guidance, and I've shared several manuscripts with AI companies and leaders, etc. And see if they want. AI people are in such a. I was going to use the word, they pretty much have buggered themselves, but anyhow, they pretty much have boxed themselves into a corner that if you're going to make AI ethical, then you have to make it more human. Because machine intelligence does not know ethics. Machine ethics does not have a heart. Machine ethics does not care. Okay? You have to be human to care and to make right judgments, right decisions. So it requires that these values become, and ethics and knowledge of human motivation become embedded in AI programs. I've had that on my agenda for 10, 15 years. I wrote about it 5 years ago at length, and now recently. And that is, I thought if I had $200 million tax-free, I could support a program of AI development to come up with that outcome. The other project, which would take probably $100 million, is to establish these family learning centers for sustainable nations. Is that if we're really going to get to the core of helping humanity, then we must help conscientious, sincere mothers and fathers, and those who want to have children, to be more loving, caring, compatible, capable, competent, and effective parents. And that needs to be taught. Of all the deficits in America, one is basic education, and the other is family development. I know a number of families that have children, and these families, make household income is at least $250,000 a year, and they still have kids who are delinquent, who are just little buttheads. They are not socially competent or capable or responsible, and those things can be taught. After the fact, not so well, but beforehand can be done very well. During the process of enculturation and socialization within the family by people who want to have children, people who do have children, parents, and grandparents, and children themselves. These are all teachable. These are all skills. We can even develop computer programs, what do they call it? Simulations.
Yeah.
To act out these at the various age levels. See, the thing about humans is that the life journey spans multiple episodes that have different learning parameters. And so we would want to have this engaged for people in the community every year, so that as children grow, they get to experience new simulations, either at home or in this school setting, where they would learn these basics of being a parent and in parenting and childcare. It's teachable. It's learnable. The trouble is, it is not instinctual. And that's where the shortcoming comes in.
And that is so for $300 million.
I could do it.
Well, I sincerely hope the money starts walking towards you. Daniel, thank you so much for your time and for
You're
this
welcome.
incredible articulation of your life and your journey so far.
Well, thank
We'll
you.
stop this here, but we'll have another session.
Let's do it.